Welcome. My name is Gena Timberman, and you are listening to Timber People, a podcast about people who, like timber, are strong, build and create, who gather us together like fuel that feeds fire. People who support structures of our community that uplift and protect. I'm really happy to welcome today my friend, JT Petherick. Welcome, JT.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. This is a blast.
This is great. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm really excited for the listeners to hear about our journey together, knowing one another and everything that you're doing and have accomplished. And to start out, JT is a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, and you're also Cherokee and Seminole. Is that
correct.
right? Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
On my mom's side, then on my dad's side, he's English. So.
Right. Well, I know that, and many of our friends and associates in Indian country know you for your great work throughout Indian country with Indian health, with health in general. And I want to talk about that. But I also want to go back to say how we know one another originally. And I want to talk a little bit about you growing up and what you're doing today, because it's really exciting with everything. But JT and I met in law school at the University of Oklahoma. We were there from 96 to 99. And
Seems like it was a lot longer than that. But one thing I remember about that is just, thankfully for me, that was during the time of the John Blake years. So it allowed me to kind of focus on studies, which I needed every bit of help to get through law school. So,
yes. And, JT, I know that you work a great deal in policy and government relations, as well as tribal relations. And I think in the 90s, being in law school and then entering into the work that you were doing with the Indian Affairs Commission, those were really instructive, important years to really seeing the capacity at which the opportunities with which our state can operate and how and really what was being accomplished, the foundation for things that were happening back then.
No, absolutely. And just, thinking about law school and then both of us kind of starting in our careers, we can't not talk about Senator Kelly Haney and, Senator, Master Artist, Miko, the whole list of all his titles that he had. But, one of the most interesting things when I was working for the Indian Affairs Commission, and that was at the same time that the Native American Cultural and Educational Authority was, just a few years old and had a staff of one, Tommy Thompson. And I specifically recall one time I was out we were at a conference, National Congress of American Indians in Palm Springs, and they were doing a lot of work, both Senator Haney and Tommy, on, trying to get some funding to get the cultural center off the ground, and also meeting with architects and everything out there. It was just really exciting time. But one evening we were just sitting around and Senator Haney said, we need somebody like you, somebody who's young, who has energy, that can, really just hit the ground running and try to, continue a lot of the great work that was taking place with the Educational Authority. And so immediately I thought of you.
Oh,
and
thank you.
It was just kind of like the perfect person. So, and I had a chance to kind of, talk to you about that, and you were definitely interested, and that just kind of started that whole dialogue. And, fortunately, we're so thankful that you were able to come on board and really make some great progress there. And then, fast forward to today where, the FAM is there and it's thriving, and it's just so critical for all of Indian country, but then Oklahoma tribes too. But another story around that I just can't help but share too is just, and this was like once you came on board to the Educational Authority, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but we were, I think Senator Haney, we were just all sitting outside one night, like on a patio or something, and I want to say his age was probably around 60 at the time, but he was just, sat down with us very candidly and said, based on my family history and, based on sort of like the life expectancy of my family members, I probably only have a few years left. And this was, in the year 2000. So he said, I want to make the most of it. And the museum, then I think we were calling it the Native American Cultural Center,
Right.
That he wanted that to be his legacy. And it's so interesting that, yes, that is part of his legacy, but, he was around for another 16 or 17 years longer than what he had mentioned at that time. And just thinking of his legacy even beyond that, with obviously the continued work that he did in the service to the Seminole Nation, his work, obviously as an artist, with the Guardian on the dome, and just thinking about that stuff, just really, as we were kind of building up to doing this podcast, those are just some of the things that I really thought about. And I know that he meant a lot to you and just was just a great mentor, along with a whole host of other folks that we could definitely just spend the next 30 minutes kind of just talking about. But
Right. Our warrior leader. I mean, he really was there to lead and to teach so much and to give so much, not just to Indian country, thankfully he did, but also to the people of Oklahoma, really. And it was really special to be a part of that journey with him and seeing his art, what he was doing with the statue, as you mentioned, on the dome, and his commitment to seeing what is now the First Americans Museum through. And I want to thank you for your support and friendship from the very beginning. I remember the day that you walked up and handed me a letter to meet with you and with Barbara and to connect with then Senator Kelly Haney, our dear friend and leader. And I just really cherish those days. I'm so appreciative for people of the community like you that were always there along the way, because it wasn't easy.
No, absolutely not. So.
But we needed to all be in that together. So you were in that with us, and thank you so much.
No, absolutely. And when you say things weren't easy, and they definitely weren't, it kind of fast forward into 2023. But I think back to those days, particularly in the state government realm, and then at that time, Senator Haney was the chair of the Appropriations Committee, which obviously is critical. And so with that, he had a lot of influence there. But, from a broader legislative context, there really wasn't a lot of understanding and support for Indian country. Right. And he really led the charge, as well as some other legislators too. But he, because of his authority in that position and the respect that he had, he was really able to advocate and work some magic on tribal issues where, frankly, there wouldn't have been a lot of support. But you kind of fast forward now and how tribes have really, one, redeveloped their economies after, the whole host of, we can go through all the, bad federal policy and state policy that has taken place over the years. But, I think tribes at that time were really just diving in and really, embracing the self-governance movement, really embracing rebuilding their economies. And you kind of fast forward to some of the issues that the legislature is facing today, and it's totally different. Obviously, you have support throughout the legislature on tribal issues, and it's just totally different. And just really thinking how impressive that is and how special it is to see that, and it's just...
Oh, when we're cooperating across the aisle for what's best for Oklahoma, it's really meaningful and it's important to everyone. And, you've been a part, as mentioned, about a really strong foundation for what is now experienced in Oklahoma, Indian country, what's happening across the healthcare landscape. When you were growing up, did you ever know you would be? I know you grew up in Tulsa, yeah. And so you're Oklahoma. You're an Oklahomie. Yeah. So did you ever realize that you would be working in law and policy and government relations or in the healthcare? I know you're an athlete and committed to your own wellness and healthcare. JT, you're one that talks the talk, but you also not only walk the walk, but you run, swim, and bike the talk.
Well, and I think, we can definitely talk about, the importance of health and what that means to all of our communities. But kind of backing up to the question about when I knew that I wanted to be involved in health policy type stuff. And it's really weird that it happened at a very young age. My mom was a nurse throughout her career, and she's retired now, but she went to nursing school when I was started when I was about 3 or so. And so, got to see her journey through going through nursing school I was the youngest of 4 children. And obviously it wasn't very easy to do that, and just so proud of the accomplishment of her being able to do that. And so she immediately started working in Tulsa and then it was the Oklahoma Osteopathic Hospital, which has gone through various names, which is now the Oklahoma State University Medical Center. And I had the coolest opportunity. They don't do it anymore. I'm really surprised they ever did that. I don't know how attorneys let this happen, but they would have summer, I guess it was like kind of a candy striper, and they had a summer program. And when you turned 13, you could volunteer at the hospital. And that was something that my siblings had done previously. And so when I was finally able to do that, I jumped on that opportunity. It was like the summer of 8th grade. Probably more so because you would get a free lunch out of it. So that was probably the big pull for me. But just being involved in that, not necessarily from the clinical side of things. And I don't know, I just sort of grasped onto that administrative type of side, which is interesting because, who would think that as a young 12 or 13-year-old that you'd be interested in that kind of stuff? Probably because I knew I didn't have the chops on the science side to really, going down that road. So really just kind of progressed from there, just really and seeing just the healthcare system at a young age, and both on the tribal side and the non-tribal side, with, Claremore Hospital being nearby and having relatives that worked over there, and then, our family using that facility, and just really got my interest. And then when I had the opportunity to move on to Northeastern State University, just really got more into the law side of things too, through some of the business classes. And then right around then, I kind of knew I wanted to explore both a health administration type background, but then also law, because the policy stuff was really interesting.
Important.
Yeah. So after I graduated from Northeastern State, then moved over to Oklahoma City to go to the University of Oklahoma's College of Public Health, and then eventually law school, where we met. So
Right. Going back to seeing your mother, and her commitment to being educated and in that field of study, and her commitment to that field and to the nursing field, and being exposed to, to our mentors and family members. That's really important. And people of our community generally, and for Native people, Native youth, to see the work that you're doing, especially. I've served on the board for the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic for a number of years. And I want to thank you for your support personally, but also for Blue Cross and Blue Shield support for the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic. And, it's not unique to see pictures of you being involved in that support, and also participating.
Some candid photos, maybe sometimes.
But participating as a community member as well. And I think it's important that, especially our young ones, see that, as a Native man, participating and being a part of those community activities. So thank you. And I also think it's important that our community members are seeing what Native men and Native professionals generally are doing in the healthcare field. And you've served as the executive director of the National Indian Health Board. Mm-hmm. You've served the Cherokee Nation as the legislative policy liaison. Yeah. Is that correct? And then, going back again to the Oklahoma Indian Affairs Commission, and then your role with Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen what is offered and available for Indian country through Native policy and programs over the years? Because it's really been great to see the access to care for Native people evolve and be strengthened in ways that are not only bringing us together, but also providing much needed services to communities and community members that otherwise would not receive it.
No, absolutely. And just, I'll probably work backwards, but, that last statement that you made where, these opportunities or services would not be available were it not for tribes. And you really see, rural healthcare access throughout the United States, throughout the world, frankly, is just a challenge. And it's just hard to have facilities, have providers, et cetera. One of the key differences that we've really seen in Oklahoma is the fact that our tribal nations are in rural parts of the state. And I was just driving a couple of weeks ago down to Houston and driving between Dallas and Houston, there was just not a whole lot of anything. It's rural Texas. And contrast that to driving through rural parts of Oklahoma, where the presence of tribes is just there, and you see that they're building economies, that they're providing services, and just how tribes have really stepped into that gap in Oklahoma is just so powerful, not only for tribal citizens, but everyone. Mm. And just thinking of the evolution of the Indian health system, those that are operated directly by the federal government, the tribally operated facilities in Oklahoma, which have just exploded over the years, as well as you mentioned the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic and the Indian Healthcare Resource Center of Tulsa, which, those two facilities are just so impressive because it was just built by grassroots, just right. Local community members, just, 40, 50 years ago saying we need some services, started just, very small, and just looking at all the work that they're doing now is just phenomenal. And I have a special appreciation for that too, because thinking in terms of growing up in Tulsa, while there was Claremore, Indian Healthcare Resource Center and some other programs were there and just growing, but just the sense of community among urban tribal citizens is just really special. And, growing up, my grandparents were charter members of the Tulsa Indian Methodist Church over in North Tulsa, and that was just something that they were very passionate about, and just that sense of community is just so vital to the urban populations. But really just thinking in terms of my role at Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and it was kind of weird. I've been there for a little over 11 years now, and when I joined, it was the first time I had a position that was not exclusively dedicated to working on tribal issues. Right. And so it was just a great opportunity, and when I had the opportunity to join the organization, I called a lot of, people, because it was going to be just a significant career shift. Talked to some people both within state government and in the tribal community, and they said, this is a great opportunity. This is an organization that is, passionate about working with the community, including tribal nations, and, you would be a good fit over there. So I took the plunge and did that, and haven't looked back, and just really love that. One of the coolest things about that is that, my title is Associate Vice President of Government Relations. And so, the primary parts of my job obviously are coordinating our work with state legislatures, state regulators, agencies, et cetera, is also, with some federal work. But a critical piece of government relations, of course, is tribal relations. So we've been able to coordinate a lot of our tribal relations work too, which is so special. And what I really appreciate about our company, one, we have a lot of tribal citizens as employees. We have a lot of customers who are tribal citizens or tribal nations, tribal economic ventures, et cetera. And throughout our company, we have taken an approach where we want to work in collaboration with our tribes and tribal communities and tribal organizations, and really in a manner that respects and upholds tribal sovereignty, which you don't see that a lot in the non-Indian business sector as well. And our legal counsel has been great and really embraced, and I think kind of going back to what you talked about, when we have collaboration and are committed to that, great things can happen. And just thinking, not to get too deep into legal talk, but if you want to make things work, you make them work. If you want to fight and put up obstacles, you can do that too. And I think that we've really had just a commitment to working in collaboration, and just, if there are jurisdictional issues or whatever, let's just work through them and, try to resolve them. It's been a very positive experience. And, one of the coolest things too is that while my role is over all of government relations, I think that our company has really identified the need to have specific staff working on tribal relations. Mm-hmm. So we have a tribal relations specialist that's been on board for about 8 years now, and Lucinda Myers, and she does a phenomenal job, and is just, well respected throughout Indian country, and gets to be out there in the community, is very committed and very passionate. We actually had our 11th annual tribal roundtable last week, where we bring in everyone across Oklahoma Indian country to come in and talk about various health issues. And it's just a really robust conversation. And, several of our tribal participants just talked about how great of a job that Lucinda does, as well as everybody else throughout our company as well. So it's something I'm extremely proud about. And frankly, if we as a company weren't doing those things, I honestly don't think I'd still be there. It's just
right. Yeah, that commitment and corporate culture to really dive into those community needs.
yes.
But going back to the government relations side, it's important the work that you and others are doing in roles like yours, that to see you at the Capitol,
I try to avoid it as much as possible, but it's
right. But to see that visibility and to know that the efforts are being made in that corporate culture to bridge those gaps is really important. And you mentioned that economic side of it, that our healthcare systems in rural Oklahoma are economic development opportunities, and that's been really important, and that affects everyone in those areas.
Yeah, and it's probably some dated material too, but I mean, we were doing some work to really increase healthcare access in rural Oklahoma, and I think that Oklahoma is doing a great job, and as well, a whole host of stakeholders on working those issues. But just like having one primary care physician, amounts to just generating like $1.5 million a year in economic, good in a particular community. And that's, like I said, that's dated and that's probably pretty low, but, just being, and I think one of the coolest things, and I know that you're familiar with this, but with Oklahoma State University partnering with the Cherokee Nation on the College of Medicine there. And I had a chance to tour that last month and meet some of the folks who were doing that. It's just phenomenal. But one of the coolest things is I think that we've identified that in order for you to have providers in rural parts of any community, you have to have those providers who are from those communities. And so it's taken obviously a long time to kind of what people usually say, grow your own providers. But I mean, that's something that the OSU and Cherokee Nation partnership has done a phenomenal job in identifying those kids out in rural communities, making sure that they have all the educational needs that they need in middle school and high school, getting them through undergraduate and on to medical school, as well as the residency programs. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And the retention rates that I'm hearing that they're having just a great deal of success in keeping those kids in rural communities. So
absolutely. And the value added services that you never heard about. When we were growing up, you'd hear stories about, you may have to take a change of clothes, but you definitely pack a lunch when you go to the doctor because you're gonna be there a while. There's a reason there were playgrounds outside because
that's part of economic development. Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that. Like thinking in terms of we would usually go to Claremore, and I had an uncle who worked there, and I mean, great providers, and the facilities do a great job given the resources that they have.
Absolutely.
But it is an economic engine when you think in terms of if you don't pack a lunch, then you're gonna have to go, across the street to find somewhere. And so a lot of businesses, thrived because of, some of those facilities. So.
Absolutely. I think of our Choctaw Nation Hospital in Tallahena and what that has done for the economy and employment opportunities down there and in other areas. And even, driving down the highway and seeing what Muskogee Creek Nation and in their facilities and being out in different areas of Cherokee Nation, the commitment that they have to the development of their facilities. And when we know about the Chickasaw Nation facilities that have provided in terms of their employment, as well as many other tribes and also up in Northeast Oklahoma. And it's important now that companies like Blue Cross and Blue Shield are asking Native people, Native liaisons, people working in the field, what members of tribes need, what tribal citizens need, what communities need, and the ways in which healthcare is provided in those value-added services is shifting to ways that are becoming more preventative.
Absolutely.
That is really important.
No, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we've struggled with as a society, particularly in the United States, is just not really thinking about all those other needs that an individual has, rather than just, going in and having an appendix removed and just thinking in terms of what are all those needs, not only for that individual, but for that individual's family. And I think that's so important. I think tribes, as well as the Indian health system, including the urban Indian clinics, have really understood that and embraced that. And obviously it's a natural fit that they get that, just given, I think that there's a strong commitment and understanding of the importance of family and community, but just thinking in terms of what are the needs of those individuals and their families as far as social services, transportation, et cetera. And they're really leading the way on, thinking in terms of healing the entire person and making sure that they have all their needs. So they're not, making return visits for infections or, bad outcomes, et cetera.
Absolutely. And I like to think in the future more and more that there will be a relationship between the healthcare services provided and our cultural services that are provided. I mean, I would love to see that the day that grandma's going to visit the doctor, that the whole family might go take her and they'd all go to their tribal museum or cultural center, or even some healthcare services or different opportunities would be provided through the cultural centers and museums when you have community gatherings occurring and the camps, the wellness camps, and the different ways in which we can incorporate education and preventative wellness care throughout our museums and cultural center programs.
No, absolutely. And I think, a big critical piece to that too, in addition to, the museums and the cultural programs, which also incorporate a lot of the food stuff too, that I'm really so impressed to see a lot of the work that's taking place in tribal communities on supporting food sovereignty. And that's something that, when you think about why tribal citizens have had struggles with various health disparities, which are obviously caused by bad federal policy, and undoing that and sort of getting back to a lot of the original ways that tribal citizens lived, and which includes food, and so I think that's just been really special to see. And there's so many examples throughout Oklahoma where we've seen just a lot of growth in that area. So.
Absolutely. I used to be a camp facilitator for Wings of America. And I know we did a Wings camp many years ago, Cherokee Nation, and facilitated throughout Indian country. This is years ago, but incorporating traditional games and awareness about sugar and diabetes. And so, yes, I would really see more of that happening on the horizon. And speaking about the future, what do you see coming up this next year and beyond for Blue Cross and Blue Shield, or opportunities for Indian country and healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things going on. And one of the coolest things that I think that our approach at Blue Cross Blue Shield is to meet our partners where they are. And I think that's something that we really have to be very deliberate about. We have so many great programs and opportunities, whether that's through behavioral health programs. And I think that, one of the cool things with technology now that, and speaking back to, coming out of COVID, I think that we've really embraced the use of technology in providing healthcare for individuals, and not to be critical of our healthcare providers, but I think that there were some maybe a little on the more older side of things who weren't really embracing technology. I mean, I think that they were trained to put hands on people, and obviously that's very critical, but there's so much that can be done from virtual visits through some safe platforms to talk to people, particularly in behavioral health issues. And I think that we've really embraced using technology in being able to provide care for our members. And again, I think it's really important to kind of meet our partners where they are, and that's working with our tribal communities to make sure that we're not coming in and providing something in lieu of what they're already doing, but how can we support? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that we want to avoid, is coming in with maybe some program. And I think that kind of goes back to maybe a hesitancy of some individual tribal citizens to seek health coverage, seek health insurance, because, they think, oh, now that I have this health insurance, then I won't be going to the Indian health system or tribe, which is, not true, obviously. In fact, you get health coverage. We want you to go to the Indian health system because that's where they can get some additional revenue. And really, tribes have done a tremendous job in maximizing that third-party revenue so they can do a lot of the great things that we're seeing, expansion, having specialty providers, et cetera. So I think our commitment is to really see how we can enhance and support the work that's already taken place. And again, I know that they have been huge in identifying opportunities to bring in specialty care where before they would have to send out individuals to get, maybe orthopedic services, et cetera. And I think that because of tribes and the urban Indian clinics and the Indian Health Service have done a tremendous job, they're starting to be able to provide that stuff where over the last, 20 years, that was never the case. So.
Right. You have to connect those spheres of influence.
Yes.
Also, that's opportunity to build community. And I've really seen it with, Tulsa and also with the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic. And it's really great. So speaking of
they have strong leadership at both places. So
it was really great to honor Carmelita Skeeter this past year.
No, I'm kidding.
But I'm just really proud of the work that has been accomplished in there, working under Carmelita's leadership and also with Robin Sunday Allen and her awesome team at the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic. And speaking of what's on the horizon, are you in training? I know you have been on Ironman competitions and different feats of physical wonder. Anything on the horizon?
Physical insanity. Well, one quick thing when we mentioned Carmelita, just such a, again, and Robin over at the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic, and I was kidding, not kidding about being scared of Carmelita, but they're both tremendous leaders and very passionate for urban Indians. And I think that, one of the things that can kind of be conflicting is that, they are 501c3 entities and, trying to walk that line of making sure that they are able to, that they're heard, that they're able to serve their population. And they do a tremendous job in doing that. But, sometimes that there are instances where, there may be a little bit of conflict, particularly, maybe some instances in Tulsa around some jurisdictional issues because, their service area overlaps with several tribes there, which 99.9% of the time, everything's fine and there's some cooperation. But, when we're talking about, maybe some jurisdictional concerns that tribes have, there can occasionally be some disagreements over that. But just thinking back at the time when I worked in Washington, D.C., and, there was some work taking place around the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, and some jurisdictional issues were raised, and she was very adamant about protecting the Indian Healthcare Resource Center and was successful in getting federal legislation to protect both those facilities. And, just thinking in terms of, trying to be that voice, one in our nation's capital, but then also, potentially in conflict with maybe some of the thoughts and recommendations of some of the tribes or tribal leaders at that time in that area. And just, that really demonstrates the strength that, both those organizations and both those leaders have. So
I'm grateful for warrior women like that know how to stand their ground.
Yes.
And, and you said it earlier of, when you want to work things out, you can come to a common ground. And, I've said it before, but I'll say it again, is we were a collision of cultures, and we can be a collaboration of cultures if we can commit to that. And so
absolutely. And that's one of the things that I always think about Oklahoma, because, when you hear about Oklahoma and somebody who's not from Oklahoma, they always say that, people are so nice and, maybe they're not always nice, but, at least there's that widespread perception that or feeling that people are nice in Oklahoma and very cooperative. And obviously during natural disasters, you see that so much. But I always go back to thinking in terms of, because of the fact of how Oklahoma evolved and Indian country mixed in with, the rest of Oklahoma, and just that history, while it's ugly and has some, various tough parts of history, it really forced everybody to kind of work together, and I think that really, while we don't agree on everything, and sometimes it's a struggle, I think that there's always that mentality that, these are our people, these are neighbors, these are community members, and we just have to work together. But also one of the things that you talked about too is just that, when you want to collaborate, you can collaborate and make things happen. When you want to disagree, that happens too. Right. But, after those disagreements and after something's settled, you move on. And I think that that's something that's unfortunately, just not really seeing a whole lot of right now, which is just kind of tough. And hopefully we can kind of get back to that where, you have a disagreement, it's resolved whether you like it or not, you shake hands and move on. And that's one thing when I was thinking about, the situation, the example of Carmelita in Tulsa. And yeah, there were disagreements on issues. It was settled and resolved. And, those partnerships, that collaboration, continue to thrive. And I think that's so critical.
I agree. And I also think it's important that people know those stories and that history and tell them like you're telling on the show, and like stories that have been passed down that relate to our shared cultural values. And it's important to know that history. And I appreciate you sharing and the leadership that you have provided to healthcare in Oklahoma and throughout Indian country. And JT, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show.
No, it's been a blast.
Thank you. And I'd love to have you back anytime to share any updates or activities that you're doing. And thank you so much.
Well, no, it's been a pleasure. And I just thank you so much for allowing me to come and share some of my stories.
Thank you.
All right.
Yakoki, Mado.
All right. Thank you.
Yakoki, thank you for joining us. Timber People is brought to you by the Possibilities Podcast platform.